Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Friday chat on LinkedIn with the Future of Privacy Forum's Jules Polonetsky. Glad that you could be with us today. And I'd like to introduce our CEO, Jules. Take it away, Jules.
Thanks, Nancy. And by the way, all of you, please join me in welcoming Nancy to FPF, where she's going to is leading our communications efforts. I may be the worst boss ever because I said join just to help cue this up, and then sure enough, I said, well, let's go live, and I didn't give her time to prepare. Her background looks great. She's poised, but I just want you to know, I may be the worst boss ever, just sort of like, okay, go stream to thousands of people. In some way, I think it's sort of supporting and pushing people forward and visible, but it actually might be a nice idea to give them a little bit of, advance notice and, time to sort of think about it and prepare. So put me in the penalty box if you wish. But anyway, Nancy, it's been awesome to have you, and thanks for kicking us off, and stay tuned. You will likely hear more from her as we do a better job to communicate with all of you about some of the issues that are just worth discussing and diving into, and increasingly complicated. So catch you later, Nancy. And I turn to a real good friend, somebody who's helped me grow intellectually and has been a source of inspiration and leadership for tech policy, for data protection. Really delighted that he's a member of our advisory board, and we've had the opportunity to do some work together with he and his colleagues at Washington and Lee in Virginia, Professor Joshua Fairfield. Some of you may remember Professor Fairfield's last book, which was a favorite of mine. I forget the exact title. You know how I remember the title, Josh? I remember the title in my mind as "The Internet of Things is Stealing Your Things," because
that's right.
I think there was a chapter there, or even like a theme in the book around that, right? Maybe just a quick, I want to talk about your new book, but
sure.
This, I think, is really still super fresh and maybe more relevant than ever. Maybe a quick hit. What's actually the right title of that book?
The title of the prior book, 2017, was Owned: Property, Privacy, and the New Digital Serfdom. And it's very much the Internet of Things is stealing your things, or what you don't own that you think you own. And it goes through the ways in which intellectual property licenses have invaded. So I just saw in the headlines yesterday, John Deere promises that new tractors will be easier to repair, but there are problems with that. So, farmers having to hack their tractors in order to repair them, that kind of thing. And the ways in which intellectual property interests, licenses, are taking over our personal property interests, the things that we own in our, in our own smartphones, or in our smart houses, in our cars, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that was the prior book, and it definitely led to, seeing how property law there worked to be updated for the newest cases. You could have old cases dealing with new things like Bitcoin or cyber trespass or asteroid mining. Then the thinking in that old book then led to the new one, which is, hey, how can we keep, how can an old law like property keep up with this blinding area of progression like the Internet of Things? And then that led to this new book, which was, how can law keep up? So it's called Runaway Technology. Can law keep up? How can law keep up with tech?
So I was struck as I was reading sort of the setup and the overview that you had on the Cambridge blog, the publisher of the book, that in some ways when you were watching Amanda Gorman, the fabulous poet who gave remarks at the inauguration and really struck a theme that woke a lot of us up to the power of her language, you really seem to be focused on the power of language and how language plays such a critical role. And obviously, I guess we all, are familiar that hashtags and, coining a good term seems to get attention, but you've tied it into, law. You're not simply talking about advocacy. Yes, if we advocate, sure, it's nice to have, a banner, but you seem to be tying this to the intellectual legal development and the force that has. So give a little more of an understanding of where you're going with that.
Well, sure. So, when you think about Amanda Gorman's poem and her work, The Hill We Climb, what that did was that created a moment. It created a set of language. If you watched on Twitter, it created a set of language around that moment. And it changed the way we spoke. It changed the way we saw certain things. All right, what's going on there? Well, when I asked myself if law could keep up with technology, the answer was pretty obviously, sure, it can keep up with technology, because law is technology. It's a specific kind of technology, a linguistic technology. If you think about how humans have survived this long, it's because we cooperate at massive scale, hundreds of millions of us, around cooperative fictions, things we make up, moments that we give name to, like the United States. And that was what Amanda Gorman's poem was about our striving not to build a perfect union, but our striving to do better with each other and to live more decently with respect to each other in a society. That's what language is. Language is human superpower. So E.O. Wilson is a famous bug scientist, entomologist, notes that there are 3 truly cooperative species on the planet: ants, bees, and humans. Now, ants and bees, they evolve in geologic time to cooperate together. And they have kind of a language. If you've seen like a bee do a little bee dance to say, oh, there's food in 15 yards in that direction. But they evolved to do that in geologic time. Humans, we upgrade our language in historical time. We can do things that ants can't do, as Yuval Harari, a popularizer, says. Ants can't guillotine the queen and declare a republic. We can. That's what law is. Law is our cooperative fiction, our cooperative language, the way we decide to work together. And it's a technology like any other. Polish author Stanislaw Lem says, what's technology? Technology is the domain of problems and their solutions posed. And law is a solution to the question of how do we live together? The only way we can decide how to live together is to talk about it, is to develop language about it. And that's what we've always done from the agricultural revolution to the industrial revolution to the intellectual property revolution, and right now to the data and to the privacy revolutions. Each time we've had to come up with a way of talking about it that made what was happening to us coherent and let us cooperate, just like we cooperate around fictions like the state of California or Wednesday or a dollar bill, or concepts like the rule of law, or all people are created equal, right? We need an all people are created equal for the 21st century. We need a way of developing this. And so that's the center of the book, how law ties into language. Law is language, and we're going to develop it the same way we always develop language, by developing things like #MeToo, Black Lives Matter, all people are created equal, and Amanda Gorman's poem.
So when it comes to technology, would a good example, it certainly in the US at least, be net neutrality, which I'm not sure.
Absolutely.
Everyone, certainly the legal structure, the term kind of almost led some of the legal structure.
Yeah.
And then we actually debate exactly what it means, but everyone decided that they were committed to it. It's just exactly what does it mean in your particular business or your particular model? Well, will Zuboff's surveillance capitalism, obviously she didn't really coin the term, Gandhi and others, have worked on this from an academic side for years, but certainly the popularization in her book, I'm not sure we know exactly the parameters, but suddenly people are saying, wait a second, is this a particular business model that needs a unique evolution in the law to structure around those terms?
Right. I mean, I think that Shoshana Zuboff is a fantastic one. So is net neutrality, right? Net neutrality, you said, we don't know what the words mean, but we're talking about it. Well, cool. That's how language works. That's how law works. There are 645 different definitions of the verb to run in the English language, right? So when we can say that something like net neutrality or something like even the word privacy means radically different things to different groups of people, That doesn't end the debate. It doesn't mean that there's nothing, that there's no there there. You know, sometimes people say, oh, we lack a definition for privacy, therefore we can't have nice things, therefore we can't really talk about it. And that's never been the good approach. I far prefer the approach that FPF has taken, where they say, fine, there are multiple overlapping ways that people see words like privacy. Let's gather a community from a bunch of different perspectives. We know that their definitions don't meet, but that's the whole point, to have a conversation about it in which the meaning of the word gets worked out into a better definition. And then, you know, Shoshana Zuboff certainly has popularized surveillance capitalism. It really has struck a nerve. I think she's good at coining neologisms. So there are a couple of other ones that I think have taken off, calling a lot of the end user license agreements that pop up and you are forced to agree to, calling those uncontracts, does some interesting work, right? Because it's not a contract. A contract is something that you agree to, that you know what's in, that you sign off on, that you consent to. And a lot of these things that just get handed to us whenever we turn on our devices, that's not a contract. That's the opposite of a contract. So I do think that people who create words like that, you can watch legal meaning coalesce around it. It's not definitive, it just starts a conversation. And that's what we've got to have, is the kind of diverse, different direction conversations that develop the language.
John Mancini in the comments says, and feel free, folks, I'm keeping an eye and eager to pull in either your questions or pithy comments. He says, the law is a frame of language to describe how do we talk about concepts like privacy. And the language we use to describe concepts changes over time and means radically different things to different groups of people. So interesting to think that perhaps one of the challenges of privacy is that we haven't developed terms that are bridgeable beyond the privacy expertise, privacy expert community, and we end up sometimes squabbling around insider nuances between terms, as opposed to maybe thinking of what are the most potent ways to send the signal. I don't know how many hours I've spent debating or being critiqued or discussing whether data protection and privacy are different things. And I get that they are, but there's this powerful communication, externally. I think we're seeing dark patterns take an interesting power. Again, not a new concept. The FTC and consumer protection regulators around the world have long had the ability to police deceptive practices, unfair, manipulative, but suddenly, because this label dark patterns
has been attached to it, right?
And all of a sudden it's showing up in legislation right now. Of course, the insider micro thinkers like us, I'm like, wait, but that's already illegal over there. So why are you saying here's a new law? We need a law around dark patterns. Don't you actually want to just take a look at the consumer protection law and say it needs to be enforced better? Or if it needs to be extended, what exactly are you saying goes beyond dark patterns and is something new or different? But maybe that's just the sausage making, and we ought to accept.
That's just the sausage. Yeah, that's just the sausage making. That's just how language works. I mean, have you ever had that experience where you're talking to a friend or an enemy or both, and you realize you're just mostly arguing because they're just not using words the way you are, right? They're just not using privacy correctly. They're just not using it to cover the same cases. That's just how the sausage of language gets made. And a key point here, our most important words, our most important legal concepts are all like that. It's not like privacy is somehow unique in the list of things like security, liberty, freedom, privacy. All of these things are contested concepts. They're concepts that if you ask 50 different people, you get 51 different ways of looking at them. But what they do is they center a conversation. And that's exactly what you were just saying. They center a conversation, the conversation then spreads around it, and then we can begin to get work done because we have a sense of, we've named the conversation. We haven't named the outcome, we've named the conversation, and then it can really begin. Then we know what we're talking about. Before we talk about words like dark patterns, we had 50 different ways of bearing on it. Now we've got a center of the conversation, and we can really get going. So I think that's a perfect example.
In addition to pointing to some inspiration from the lovely words of Amanda Gorman, you also pointed to inspiration or maybe desperation at the way words were used the last several years in the political process in the US and beyond. Can you give us a little more context on that?
Sure. Look, a large part of this book was written because out of my despair as a lawyer, as a linguist, as a privacy scholar, looking at the way in which language started to twist in the past 4 years. And to watch words like fake news change meaning, right? As it was originally introduced, it was a set of words around news that is factually incorrect, that is produced purely to create an outrage reaction or an engagement reaction. It's cheaper than real news. It was epidemic. And that language then got turned into an absolute attack on all responsible journalism. All right. When you're watching words change like that, and if you're aware of history and you've watched words change like that and sort of drift, sink like the Titanic in cultures over time, that makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck. Watching then groups like the alt-right try to speak new worlds into being, in a way, inspired me to write this book, saying, no, this is what we've got to do in response, that we have to speak worlds of cooperation, worlds in which all people are created equal, is at the center, worlds in which the rule of law, which, let's be clear, the rule of law is a cooperative fiction. The very idea that we as a society ought to be governed by a set of invisible agreements rather than by pure force has been for much of human history simply not a fact. But we made it true by agreeing that it was true. And that's the part that we need to do.
Because I have spent most of my time with you as a law scholar, but you actually started as a linguist. Your initial early days of tech entrepreneurship was focused on language and learning and translation, right? So interesting. Is this the first time you've built on sort of that early history of your career really as a linguist? So
just the technology side has been there all along, but I wasn't alone responsible for it, but Rosetta Stone was a family business about 20 years ago, and we got it off the ground. And I was their director of research and development. So that was my background, was not just technology entrepreneurship, but linguist teaching language. And this is definitely born out of that experience as the director of Rosetta Stone, developing 25 different programs and seeing the correlation, seeing the responses, the ways in which the language was constantly shifting and changing, the ways in which one language would map onto another. Absolutely, that's what this is.
Wow, phenomenal. Let's make sure we point to two things. First of all, for people who want to dive into the book, it's available for sale already, right?
That's right.
Right afterwards. I assume we can flash Amazon or
Amazon.com or joshfairfield.com. There's a button right there.
Or your local community bookstore for those who are going to go in that direction as well. And you're going to discuss both this book and a couple of others in some sort of group intellectual book fest of some sort. What's that's coming up soon, but what's that about? Are these complementary books or?
So the idea is that the only way we develop language is by gathering groups of people with cognitively and demographically diverse approaches to a problem. This is Scott Page's work on saying, to solve any complex, innovative, non-routine task, what you need is a team that brings more and diverse views to the table. So what we did was we went and we found 4 people who have very, very different takes on the law, and specifically on the law of the future. So Funmi Arewa, who's at Temple, has a book on disrupting Africa. That is technological innovation on the African subcontinent. Stacey Ann Elvey at UC Davis has a book, A Commercial Law of Privacy and Security for the Internet of Things. And of course, Frank Pasquale has his book that just came out, the Laws of Robotics, the New Laws of Robotics. So we've got 3 plus mine, 4 completely different ways of coming at this. And the idea is to do what you and I have talked about FPF doing for years, which is, again, to bring people from a wide range of viewpoints where almost nothing that I'm going to have to say is going to overlap with Funmi Arewa's book, for example, and so on and so forth, so that we can really triangulate and try to make a decent guess as to what's going to go on in the next 20 years. For people that are interested, again, joshfairfield.com, there's a tab under Envisioning Law's Future, and the event is free. In fact, there's going to be, we hope, a raffle and some fun stuff to win. So please feel free to sign up. It's March 19th from 2 to 3:30, and I'd love to have everyone who's interested show up. Again, that's on joshfairfield.com under Envisioning Law's Future.
One final thought. As you noted, we really try to work in a cross-disciplinary way because some of the most when data protection law is the law that underlies every human activity nowadays because of how it's modulated by tech or data,
right.
Somehow it being the province solely of privacy experts or data protection experts without maybe fully appreciating the rights and freedoms that you are in. Right. At the end of the day, most of us are not looking for privacy for the sake of being alone in a yurt. But we're looking for privacy because we want to support individual autonomy. We want to be able to exercise the other freedoms that are very often, levered by privacy, of course. Maybe some of us do want to be, have some quiet time in the yurt to get work done and all that. So look, glad you're safely out of the snow and
safely out of the snow and warm. Yeah, everything's great.
Concentrating in that yurt. But one of the critiques that we always see is, someone's a legal scholar and they suddenly discover that they're working on something that has something to do with ethics or something to do with a whole adjacent field. And then they jump in and they say some things and everybody in that discipline has their head explode because they're like, well, you didn't cite me, but more seriously, they say, well, you didn't appreciate the 800 years of nuance around this. And here you are dillying and dallying and da-da-da-da. And I get their point, but at the end of the day, there are truly very few people that are, fully immersed in each. And I think the challenge is to be able to, understand it at the level that it influences cross-discipline. So you've really been doing some cross-disciplinary work, but I wonder have you been, obviously if you do the work, you hopefully get the right, landscape, but any thoughts for sort of scholars or others who are thinking about the challenges of really being sophisticated enough in more than one discipline to comment and to write in an artful way?
Sure. I mean, I think it's exactly what you said. It's a matter of just pure boldness. Sometimes what you say, this is well known. The book, what was it now, 15 years ago, 12 years ago, called The Medici Effect, had to do with the systematic value of crossing different disciplines and the ways in which one discipline often holds the keys to long-standing intractable problems in other disciplines. For example, in Runaway Technology, Can Law Keep Up, this book, there are places where cultural anthropology and linguistics have answers that law has long looked for. And we've spent a whole lot of time wondering, what does law have a method? And law has tried to copy the method. It's tried to copy the method of law and economics, of economists. It's tried to copy the method of computer scientists, and so on and so forth. And it's sort of lost its own method. And it can be reminded of that by other disciplines which have continued to operate the way law does, which is by developing language, by developing narrative. So, I think the answer is to be bold and to be humble at the same time. Realize that you're walking into an area, you're walking on holy ground, you're walking into an area where other people may well have thought of a whole lot of things that you haven't. That's very much the case for lawyers, for example, who walk into the relationship between science and technology, philosophy of science. And the trick is to both be bold and to be humble, to do it, and then to listen really hard to the pushback in the sphere. But I'll say this, it is well worth it, and it's often far more worth it to add something to the conversation than it is to sort of add a curlicue onto a conversation that's been going on for 800 years. I think the only way we're going to be able to break through is if we gather groups of people with very, very different approaches and get them to talk together.
Andy Purdy flags to us, we might explore mechanisms to increase transparency regardless of how terms are defined. For example, the benefits of a software bill of materials, independent testing, audit. I guess, yes, we're going to coin those terms. giving them the meaning and value underneath, so that it actually maps to what we're actually doing, is certainly going to be critical. Paul asks again for the name of the books and the author just mentioned by Joshua. I think you were mentioning. Well, let's recap, and we'll also wrap up. I'm not sure if the writer is asking us about the Medici Effect, and we'll close by recapping the appropriate titles of the other books, and we'll post them all in the links. So let you flag us again to where people who want to read about the Medici Effect, and of course the name of the book that you should all be rush ordering. Final word.
All right. Well, the name of the book is Runaway Technology: Can Law Keep Up? The other books mentioned are Funmi Arewa's Disrupting Africa, Stacey Ann Elvey, A Commercial Law of Privacy and Security for the Internet of Things, and Frank Pasquale, The New Laws of Robotics. And then the book that we just mentioned previously is The Medici Effect, which is well worth reading in its own right. On the books and the event that I've just mentioned, joshfairfield.com, joshuafairfield.com will both work. And there's a tab under Envisioning Law's Future where you can sign up for free and come look at all the books and maybe even win a copy of each one.
Delighted that some of you were able to join us today for this chat with Professor Joshua Fairfield at Washington and Lee Law, and a member of the Future Privacy Forum Advisory Board. Phenomenal to have your words, always enlightening, gave us a lot to think about. Do order the books. I'm going to do it as soon as I sign off. I usually read a book before interviewing the author, but I really just came across this. I knew that just plunging in with you would take us in some interesting directions. So after I read it, I may want to
we'll do it again.
Debate some of these points for sure, and I'll look forward, if I can, to joining the group conversation, which sounds like it's going to be fascinating. Hey, everybody, stay well. Josh, great to see you. Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye.
Thanks so much, Jules. Bye-bye.